By 5 votes to 4, the US Supreme Court has overturned the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade case, effectively giving states the option to outlaw abortion. At the moment, almost half the states in the US are expected to severely reduce the abortion term limits, and 13 are expected to ban it from conception. Whilst this has garnered support from the US right, including from former President Donald Trump, many, both in the US and around the world, are angered by the decision. Supporters of the decision claim that this is saving human lives and is the only moral standpoint. Opponents say that this could endanger the lives of women, both physically and mentally, especially since some states are planning an outright ban, even in the case of rape or incest. But this is not a blanket ban on abortions. It merely gives the power to the individual states to decide what route to take. But should the states be the ones to decide what happens to a woman's body instead of the woman? What's more important, the life of an unborn child or the life of a mother? Will banning abortion stop them, or just make them more dangerous to get access to? Should the US Supreme Court have overturned Roe v. Wade?
So let's get to it. Should the U.S. Supreme Court have overturned Roe versus Wade? Dear ladies, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we pick up the conversation right after. So, Amy, please take the lead.
Yes, the Supreme Court should have overturned Roe v. Wade. That 1973 decision was a case of judicial activism, where our justices at the time decided that abortion was a right that they said was founded in the Constitution. However, has now been shown there is no constitutional basis nor national history of abortion that backs up that erroneous initial decision. And so we applaud this latest opinion that has come out by the court, and we celebrate that lives will now be saved in America at a greater level.
And Bre, your take on the matter?
No, Roe versus Wade should not have been overturned, because now you're going to have states, especially your southern states, who are ready and itching to make sure that we outlaw abortions. Some of our southern states have been ready to do this since the beginning of time. And we also know that not only is this going to make sure that abortions are outlawed, it's going to also make sure that we don't have safe abortions. So now you're going to have women having abortions and back alley abortions, and this will be detrimental to the health of women going forward, and especially in situations where we have women who are being raped and babies being born out of incest.
Right, and we will get to all of this in a second. Last but definitely not least, Margot, your take?
Thank you. I certainly don't believe that overturning Roe versus Wade was the best way for the United States to protect both women and children, if that's truly the concern. I understand that this may be a win for many Americans, but it also sends a very clear message to American women, especially those who maybe have had abortions before. It's bringing up wounds, and it's basically telling them that their decision was wrong and that it is now condemned. And that's where America stands on it. It's quite sad.
Right. So from this point onwards, dear panelists, please feel free to interact with one another. And I would like to start by noting that the court's ruling does not make abortion illegal. You know, we have many foreigners watching, but with the access to the procedure no longer deemed a constitutional right, states can now ban it. So, Amy, I would like to start with you. What does it mean in practice? How quickly will we see the impact of this ruling on the ground?
Yeah, so what this means in practice is that Roe v. Wade took away the rights and the voices of the voters to elect officials legislatively in their state who would bring forth legislation that shows what their values are across the state as a whole. Now that voice has returned to the voters, who in turn can elect their legislators to support the majority opinion across the state. In Texas, what that means is that we are a largely pro-life state. The majority have voted in pro-life legislators, and those legislators have already put a law on the books in our state called the Human Life Protection Act. It's a trigger ban that goes into effect 30 days after the final judgment is rendered. And that says that abortion is now illegal in our state from conception on. That's our state. Now, all the other states will come up with their legislation and their laws based on the voices of the people as well. And so we'll see this conversation turn to the states, and on a state-by-state basis, states will decide where to land.
So, Bre, it wasn't a question of women's rights, even though the impact of it is directly affected, but the question of federal law versus state. So maybe the campaign surrounding it is a bit misleading to an extent?
Well, let's say, for example, if a state like South Carolina officially bans abortions from conception. If you are a poor, low-income mother, you can't go across state lines and possibly be able to get an abortion. So in situations like that, it makes it harder for the poor, low-income, or even the young lady who's afraid to tell her family that she's even pregnant, that she needs an abortion. And even in a situation where, say, if the baby isn't growing correctly as it should in the body, you're not able to get an abortion. So it just leaves a gray area in situation, and it leaves a problem of, really, does the woman have a right to choose about her body and what she feels what's best for her and what's safe for her? So it's a bunch of people making decisions for people who can clearly make decisions for their body on their own. So this ruling is it's going to be detrimental effects going forward. And yes, as the question was asked before, we have seen actions take forth on the ground now. I believe it was a state, I don't remember which state it was, on Friday, they had abortion scheduled. And when the Supreme Court ruling came down, they had to call all these women and tell them that they can no longer perform these abortions. In South Carolina, our governor, Bre Maxwell, is already calling for a special session to make sure that we have a 6-week ban when it comes for abortions, the fatal heartbeat bill. So a lot of these actions are taking place on the ground now. And as the young lady said before me, in Texas, I have a friend in Texas, and we were having a conversation about all this stuff the other day. So a lot of this stuff is taking place on the ground now.
And Margot, for the sake of the argument, we naturally go to the extreme, to life-threatening conditions for a pregnant woman, or in case of rape or incest. But maybe the more basic question that needs to be asked is, why does a woman is being prevented from making a crucial decision on her own fate, her own life? No?
Yes, I agree. And I think that this ruling sends that message very clearly. Our justices like Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas, who are sexual predators making decisions about my body and what I can do and not do with it, they're not really ones to speak about choice. They're sexual predators with many allegations against them. And they're the ones that are making decisions about what a woman who maybe has been assaulted by men like them can and cannot do with their bodies. I think it's very interesting to call Texas a pro-life state when children get massacred by automatic rifles. There's nothing being done about that. Is it only that the Supreme Court, or that the state of Texas, or that the voters care about babies when they're inside the womb? What are we doing about women who can't get access to health care once they have postpartum depression and they're forced to carry their children? What's going to happen? And the absolute irony of it all is that we have a formula shortage in the United States right now, when we can't even give women access to feed their children. And now they're going to be forced into motherhood? How dare they?
So, Amy, I'm sure you're well familiar with those arguments Margot just made, and the connection between the lack of gun legislation to the issue of abortion, etc. And it also brings me to the question, realistically speaking, wouldn't it mean that we will only be seeing abortions turn into even less safe procedures on the ground?
So in the 1970s, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was an abortionist and performed numerous abortions, stated some erroneous facts that have been perpetuated throughout time. When he transitioned to becoming pro-life, he very honestly said these statistics were based on outright lies. The number of women that we said died from illegal abortions before Roe were completely made up statistics. And so the reality is that we have amazing healthcare programs in Texas. I can speak on behalf of our state for women, both of low income as well as women of means who can pay for their services. In Texas, we have a program called the Alternatives to Abortion Program. It's budgeted at $100 million for the biennium, and that was brought into pass, that increase in the previous legislative session. And what that program does for women in urban areas and rural areas is it meets the tangible needs of moms facing unplanned pregnancies, and it helps take care of mom and baby up to 3 years after birth with formula, with diapers, with wipes, car seats, strollers, baby beds, pregnancy tests, and ultrasound and whatnot. And so that's one of the many ways that Texas takes care of our women. And then we have privately funded pregnancy health centers as well in our state. We also have the Healthy Texas Women program that provides mammograms, sexually transmitted infection care, and reproductive care as far as contraceptives goes. And so Texas has put that in place. It spends $352 million towards that program that also provides for low-income women, and our Medicaid program covers over half of the births in our state. So Texas is poised to take care of our women and our babies. And we know that that care will bring many women to very healthily bring forward their child and keep that child with support or place that child for adoption.
But Bre, theoretically speaking, this legislation could facilitate in the future a state, for example, forcing women to take a pregnancy test before boarding a plane to a state that does facilitate abortion, or perhaps local authorities hacking on computers to see if women are actively searching for information on such procedures. It may sound far-fetched, but some suggest it's a realistic option.
There's no basis for any of those suggestions at this time. We haven't heard anything like that. We know that there are medical privacy rights that are protected in our state. And so that's not anything that I've heard.
We also didn't think that Roe was going to get overturned overnight, and look where we are. We have to be ready for this.
I actually did think that Roe would be overturned, and we worked for 49 years towards this. And it's beautiful to see that our country still rights wrongs, and where injustices happen, it's taken over 62 million lives in our country. We've seen justice return and the ability to legislate abortion, again, return to the states where the conversation will continue from here.
Yeah, Bre, in the few seconds we have left, please. Yeah.
The caveat is that if we're going to force these women to have these babies, we need to make sure that there are measures in place to make sure that they are taken care of once they're born. For instance, in South Carolina, we have one of the worst healthcare systems in this country. Our governor has refused to expand Medicaid. So in turn, we have people not being able to afford healthcare. We still have some of the worst school systems in this country. So if we're going to force people to have these babies, we need to make sure that access to healthcare and education is available.